Okay, hello and welcome to Vibrations today. This is a new way of doing things for us. We're all Zooming from different locations. From wherever you are, we thank you for joining us. We've got a couple of people here that are joining us today. Freya, if you'd like to introduce your guest to us today.
Yes, so sitting next to me is Louise, who is a priestess of note. An amazing journeyer and walker of the world, earth spirit walks and everything amazing. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much.
And we also have Anthony Kilner, who is the editor extraordinaire of Supernal Magazine Australia. It's fabulous to have you with us for the first time today.
Thank you for having me.
And who else have we got? Kat, would you like to introduce your friend here?
Absolutely. So just in the vision right here, we've got the amazing Janna Herberg. So a fantastic shamanic breath worker that I experienced some of her magic medicine on Saturday, and just someone who is very heart-centered, very much wanting to make major ripples and changes in the world. So super inspired and super grateful to have her on today. So thanks, Janna, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
How lucky are we today?
Juicy.
And we have our fabulous Russell.
Hey, I'm over here in the studio recording and streaming you live. So when we need to go break, I will let you know when we need to go break.
Sure. Thank you, Russell.
You're
and
welcome.
Jess.
Hi. on the go, keeping busy, and tuning in from a distant location with my minions. Hi.
Okay, so I guess for those for our guest today, basically the essence of what this is all about is kind of just connecting those out there that are living in the human condition and creating the possibility of bridging the gap between the way that we exist at the moment and what's possible. And so we've been blessed to have beautiful discussions around the different modalities that we practice out there in the world, and so look, I put it to you today, guys. What's been coming up in each of your worlds that is sitting there for us to discuss today?
Sounds of silence. I love it. This is radio at its best, isn't it, folks?
You know,
Let's see. What can we find in the laundry basket today?
Yeah, that's it. Well, I guess for me, like, and I know that we haven't really delved into it, but it's sort of been sitting there on the surface. Is what's happening in the world? This perpetual fear mongering in the method that's coming at us about the imminent end of our world due to the way that we have, as a species, been treating it. And I'm just like, what's possible if we look? I think it was great to use the children as a platform, and I can actually see some magic. And because it affects them most directly, because it's what we're leaving them, it's the legacy that we're leaving them. And I'm just I'm interested in the conversation around how we can shift the mindset of those that are really objecting the information that is scientifically evident, and try and shift and create a new kind of conversation that doesn't have so much resistance.
Can I jump in here then?
Love you to.
Yeah, good. I've just actually finished interviewing Damien Gamu, who's created the 2040 documentary that is all about the future. And he was explaining during the interview that when you're bombarded with constant negativity, it actually starts breaking down your frontal cortex. And he went into the science of it all, which I won't do. But basically, the negativity that's coming from the media, that's other places, once you get bombarded so much, when you get forced to make a decision, what really happens at that point is you go to, oh, I've got to fall back to where I was because that was my safe space. And so people, we get the same governments voted in because people don't know how to deal with it. And so one of the challenges that he was talking about in a big way was being able to say to people, hey, here's a way forward that's not negative, that gives you a structure that allows you to move forward into the future. And so that changes the brain waves, the brain patterns, the chemistry in the body, which then allows people to say, oh, I can do that. And they'll make that change at that point. The other interesting thing that he put about, we were talking about Strike for Climate, what Greta Thunberg's doing and a whole lot of other people are doing out there. And you have polar opposites. So you have government saying one thing, media saying something else, elder kids saying that, you know, what are we leaving, us as adults, what are we leaving for them? And there's so many different arguments either side of that. And so again, it comes back to we as older people leaving something, but there's this argument that this comes on, and I'm going to throw that out to everybody, but the argument comes into it is the governments say we have to build more, we have to rape the earth more, we have to do a whole lot of other stuff more to make money for all these people. And the kids are sort of saying, but if you keep doing that, we won't have anything. So this is where the legacy that we leave is. And, you know, I find that argument quite interesting because if we keep, and I know rape's a pretty strong word to use, but that's essentially what we're doing to our planet. We're utilising every resource possible for a whole lot of people to make a whole lot of money, but it's not the rest of the world, and it's not the kids that are getting the benefit of that money because all we're doing is building rubbish and selling rubbish. So that human condition that we're talking about is the fear, the generation that says we have to do this, we have to do that, really gets to me and irks me a lot, because you've got to have people protesting, but you've got to do it in a way that, you know, people, as Damon says, you've got to have people, you know, you can go and glue yourself to the ground if you want to. That makes a statement. You can be violent if you want to, but that's really the wrong statement. But you've got to be able to stand up and say, hey, what the hell, people, you're destroying our planet and we've got to live here, and it's not just us, it's our kids as well. So there's a lot going on.
That's really true, and it's interesting because I've just written 2 articles about forests for Supernal for this next month's magazine, so I won't give away too much yet because you've got to get the copy. But both of these forests that I've written about, one of them is particularly a chewit forest in the southwest of Western Australia, and it's the world's only native chewit forest. And part of the content of that article is looking at the fact that since Australia was colonised in 1788, then it took until the 1830s for this chewit forest to begin to be logged. And then the logging stopped in 1975. So that means that in 145 years, 110,000 hectares of one-of-a-kind forest on the planet is reduced down to under 3,000 hectares now. That's insanity at its best, right? So and it's interesting because what I found in the 20 years I've been working in transformational work on the planet, regardless of whether it's with Indigenous people, whether it's writing for the magazine or running Earth Heart, what happens is it's the people on the ground that actually get in and start the projects and keep them running, and the other ones that are actually creating change. Even in the forest down in Ludlow, which is near Bustleton, there's the organisation, which is not for profit, is going for obviously funding from different areas that it's available in order to restore things, looking for donations, getting people to sponsor and so on and so forth. But there's no money available coming from the councils. Not enough is what I'm saying. There's not enough money to fix the problems of the past in order to shift the direction of the future that's coming through the organization that we as humanity have put in place and that continue to vote for and continue to support in order to help us with these situations. It's just not coming through. You know, the entire forest is riddled with weeds and noxious weeds that are introduced species, and they're difficult to kill. They actually have to be weeded by hand. So the manpower for the wages and the wage system in Australia certainly isn't there to be able to afford to pay people, for the government to pay people to go in and weed that. So, you know, so it's the people in the town, 500 people in the community and another 400 school kids who are getting in, who are planting trees, weeding, putting prisoners, you know, putting up fences from one of the local prisons and such. There's a whole lot of stuff that's going on that is beginning the process of rectifying just the 2% that's left. And then how do we bring back what it's taken us 145 years to destroy, when there was a culture living here, many countries, many clans living here, who managed that for 70,000+ years.
No, absolutely. I think, you know, from what you're saying, Freya, and also Anthony, just about sustainable practice. And so conversations, when people start to get upset about what's going on the planet and they start to see all the damage and they get into the finger pointing game, like, it comes for us to use all these different personal, like breath work and, you know, and crystal dreaming and all the other things that people are using to become more awake. It's time for like our consciousness to upgrade itself to a point where we can just really have our super brains on and be able to come together, discuss what we can do and actually implement it. The time for talking about this stuff, as we're all saying, is gone. It's time now to actually come together as a human family and go, okay, so what can we do now to replenish? Like, okay, so if fish stocks are really being, you know, depleted, then we just have to look at other sources of eating so that we give it time. And even I think on the news, there was something around Christmas time in Australia, we love our prawns. And so even somewhere like Coles, you know, they were putting it out there to be literally choosing stocks that are replenishable, that are sustainable. So that's great to hear at Coles level that they're actually starting to get this, that we can't just have prawns every Christmas because that's what we all want to do. If there's not the supply there, then we have to give it a time to recover, and we have to start looking at these sorts of measures. So I think it is getting there. These talks and these people's minds are opening to the fact that, you know, things need to happen, and there are people around the world. You know, Janna's doing certain things in Bali, which is awesome, you know, and it's got a retreat coming up. Everyone's coming together and doing their bit. And so I think, you know, all this awakening that's happening, all these people that are going, I've had enough of all these problems or these bad relationships or whatever. And that's the little prick in their consciousness to go, okay, I've got to awaken. So all these things are happening, but it's just looking at, is this practice, whether it be loving someone, is it sustainable? Is this going to nurture me long term? Something like that at a really small level, but it's also a massive impact, the same as you're eating. So if I'm eating this, is this something sustainable? Is this something that, you know, what are the consequences of what we're choosing? So becoming more conscious creators, I think, is such an important part of the puzzle, and also upgrading our brains to the point where, you know, Dr. Joe Dispenza, for example, does a lot of work in terms of helping people to heal their bodies and, you know, turning on their supermind. Like, there's a lot of that sort of talk going on, a lot of people speaking to that. So I think that's very promising, and it's hopefully going to be not too little too late for, you know, the animals in Africa, you know, all sorts of animals around the world, and flora and fauna, that it can be replenished and come back to normal levels. I think in David Attenborough, One Planet, I think 7 Worlds, or whatever the documentary is that he's got out at the moment. Beautiful, beautiful cinematography if you guys get a chance to see it. But talking about the whales. And so was just saying about the numbers and the whaling and how much their numbers were, you know, severely, severely diminished to the point where it's like 3,000 from like well over 100,000 or whatever it might have been. So when the whaling stopped, those numbers have started to come back. No, actually, I think it was in the hundreds of thousands to then like maybe 65 or something. Like, it was really huge difference. But then they've come back into the thousands again. So just if you give the earth a little bit of help, it's amazing what then can be done from that space.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different points in here that I think we're sort of we're skipping over in a way as part of that human condition that you were talking about, and that is over the years when I've worked with a lot of kids, I've watched them develop energetically, so through their chakra energy systems. And I'm noticing big changes that with younger people now being more aware than us adults were, and I'm tipping I'm probably older than most of us in this discussion. But the thing is, they're growing at a different rate now.
Yes.
And so they are more aware than we ever were, and especially from my generation ever was, in regard to energetically. So energetically is the planets, their own energies, their own feelings, it's their own understanding where people are coming from. And I watched an interesting video on nihilism today as part of research stuff that I'm doing, and that's a very real issue for a lot of younger people that I'm seeing. And that is not being able to deal with what's happening above them with people that aren't, let's say, awake. When people are awake or becoming awake now, they're waking up into a nightmare because they've got no understanding of what they're actually realizing, i.e. let's have a look at Matrix as a good movie for awakening into a nightmare. There's all this stuff, you know, and these young kids are growing up with that nightmare where certainly I never did, because it was a whole different generation. So I think that understanding is one path forward in everything that we're talking about. And then the next step, of course, is dealing with the people that are still asleep and the governments and the media that want to keep everyone asleep by doing control over them. And so the kids are fighting that control. Of course, there's where our nihilism comes into it. It's a really fascinating topic.
Absolutely. And I come from an education background as well, and I do find I left it when the government really started to shift it. It changed governments when I was teaching, and I got to be at the forefront in some innovative approaches to education back in New Zealand. And then that shift really impacted my desire to stay within the system. I'm just finding myself navigating back to the education. I think it's super important now that we have a voice to the children, and that we can demonstrate that they have a voice, and how the education system still is working around a process that was relevant 100 years ago. And
I'm not quite that old, by the way.
Yeah, but look, it doesn't serve the purpose of what's necessary today.
Yes.
And there's a real opportunity for us, and I believe that come from modalities of spirituality and understanding the realms of existence outside of just the physical body that we're in, to be able to because we have to amp this up. Like, we can't, the conversation, like Kat was saying, has been around. We've been talking about this for a long time.
We'll talk about it.
Yeah, and the action it's loud and clear. It's at us. We have to be there. And the children are starting to rise. I think whoever supported Greta in that movement, they did a great job. And it really ruffled the feathers of those in Power, the boys club at the top. And we need to continue to feed that and nurture that with these children, so that they can stand up together. And this is their world. You know, we're at the other, on the other side of it. And I'm clear that I'm moving back. I've just actually had an interview with a that's going to allow me to create the model which started this whole Vibrations Around Human Being Day, which brings us back to core and all of what we're about. And the platform is to introduce this through an education platform. So I'm really excited about what's possible for the children today.
And that's the key thing, I think, is education. I'm not great at blowing my own trumpet, but that's what Supernal is all about, is education. It's about looking at, yes, we all know there's big pharma, we all know there's big government, we all know there's people behind that, we all know there's interdimensional stuff behind that. But the hard part for a lot of people is to get their head around what is actually really happening. And again, it gets a generational thing, that your education for kids, my education for the kids I've taught over the years, has always been about being open and honest and being to understand what they're experiencing. And then that way, how they verbalize that, whether it's in pictures, excuse me, or words, or through meditation, dreaming, that sort of thing. I mean, it's all there to be had. It's just that a lot of us as older generations aren't able to connect into their way of thinking because we're told we have to think this way.
Right.
And you know, this is inherent, and this is not going to change in a single generation. You know, I've seen what my kids do, and eventually I'll have grandkids and I'll teach them in a different way as well. But the thing is, it's a generational thing, and it's going to take generations to get us back. But Damon was so positive, because this is the whole crux of all of this. Damon was so positive about what we can do now that will make a difference. And that'll make a difference to sustainable farming, to sustainable living, to embracing environmental change, to actually make the planet a much better place to live.
I think that's important what you're saying, Anthony, because it's just about the action that's got to come, because we've been talking about it for so long. And also the energy, you know, you don't want to have the energy of these children wasted just on which it's not wasted, but the sense of not fighting against what already is, but we've got to actually fight for what it is that we desire and what the vision is for the world, and come together as a collective to start dreaming again of what we've sort of forgotten to dream, I guess. In, you know, the way the world is so busy and so on, we've forgotten with all the distractions that are going on. What are we actually here to do? What would we like to, there's so many interruptions in our life. We've got to remember to dream again, imagine, and use this amazing mind we have to come together and start to be all on that same line about having a thriving planet. You know, someone was talking about, you know, when people focus on cancer. And I know that Janna's had her own journey in that regard, her own health journey. But when you focus instead of, I want to get rid of the cancer, I want to fight against it, when you go, I wish to have a thriving body that's healthy, you know, that's a different way to be with something. And that, I think, you know, in the human condition, that's got to be really highlighted, is we're focusing on what we desire to expand, not on what the problems are. And so I think that's a really key thing to remind people, because so often in selling something, it's like, to get rid of this problem, buy this. So we're getting, if we can move away from that consumerist identity and move to one of sustainability, which is looking at what practices we do that actually has things thriving, that actually has things in balance and in harmony, and have that be the key focus, and have that around the discussions, instead of just purely looking at, you know, all the things that have been past. Well, that's the past now. So what are we looking at now, and how can we endeavour to make it, improve it, and you know, ameliorate our situation?
Speaking of balance and harmony, you know, the oldest tradition, written tradition on the planet, is the Vedic tradition. And the Vedas and the mantras and the rituals that were created in that philosophy came from the experience of the rishis, or the wise men, sitting in nature for extended periods of time and really being present and listening. And what they observed was that there is sounds and cues, which are always frequency, that go with the faculties and facilities of earth and nature. So all of the mantras, everything, people would have heard of Ganesh, you know, really simply Gam Ganapataye Namaha is probably the most common globally known mantra. These and all of the other mantras, they are actually assigned to different frequencies. So in that tradition, you literally work with these sounds in order to bring the elements of creation back into balance. And if we go back to the ancients in all of the different cultures, then what we find is that there'll be a rainmaker in every clan. There'll be a fire keeper. There'll be all of these different aspects in order that and they use sound to attune to nature, and then they call rain. I know in my own experience, when I was running Dreamtime cleanup days, I'd always speak to the earth, even if it was raining, and I'd ask. I was like, please, can we have, you know, moderate weather that day so that we can facilitate this service? And every single time, without fail, we would be gifted with what we asked for, because we were focused on our spiritual development, our soul, you know, or being connected to all that is, as well as doing service in the world. And you see, it's and I'm not just speaking to the Hindu tradition, but all of these ancient traditions, and there's this concept of information being lost. It's not lost. It's there all of the time. And if we are to awaken and attune back into those frequencies, then we can always balance how much fire's in our own being or how much fire's in the weather. We can do all of those things. This is where the concept of the harp technologies and things that came to bust up the frequencies of nature and such. If you haven't researched that, it's definitely worth a look. So, and what also interests me about these traditions is that they pretty much all, from what I can see of the years of study that I've done and research, is that they believe in a philosophy of reincarnation. And even in the Catholic and Christian traditions, if you go back before the Bible was edited, then it speaks to reincarnation. So that's an interesting concept in itself, because on one level, we're speaking about what are we leaving the children, right?
Yeah.
But what are we leaving for ourselves
Yeah.
the next time around?
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, but something really sparked my interest while you were talking, because I just had a session with a whole family, a breathwork session. Father, mother, daughter, son, boyfriend of the daughter, best friend of the daughter, true story. And I started chanting what you just said, and I don't even know what it means. What does it mean? It was something intuitive. I started chanting this mantra, and then one of the girls started chanting it while she was breathing as well. So it's, I have a lot of those kind of stories, you know, so we intuitively know.
Just the most amazing
In the Vedic tradition, Ganesh is the elephant-headed god. He's got an elephant's head because of an interaction that he had with his father and mother. So effectively, he's the son of the father and mother of creation. Yeah. So in that pantheon, it's Shiva, and the wife of Shiva is, or the Shakti of Shiva is Parvati, and so they had the son Ganesh. So by virtue of him being the progeny of the first son of God or child of God, actually it's the shiny sun that they're talking about, is the remover of obstacles and the bringer of abundance. So it's always, in terms of that tradition and philosophy, whenever you're going to begin any kind of ceremony of any kind, people work with Ganesh because it removes the obstacles to facilitating and creating what it is that you really want. So that's, yeah, perfect.
I didn't know that, but like I work with other beings or goddesses or gods, so it's interesting because I didn't know where it came from. It just like came out of my mouth. Wow. And now you just said it, I was like, excuse me, wait. So, and something else that I witness a lot is that I have a lot of first timers that haven't been in touch with spirituality or consciousness on a conscious level before. And everyone has this urge, this desire to connect. And the moment they start investigating into self inquiry, into self-growth, they are able to realize that we are all interconnected, and then they have that desire to help the planet, to like do something about it, and that's really beautiful to witness.
So they're waking up.
Yes. I'm waking up people, basically. I love my job.
I wonder what the karmic ramifications of that might be.
It's all good. I feel like, you know, there's the concept of sacred geometry, because sacred geometry is the structure underpinning all things, right? We have light, and we have sound, and then from sound comes light. And the very first time I ever actually saw that or experienced that was when I had my head underwater in a sound bath, and the pulsations were going near my head, and as those frequencies were going in and connecting with my pineal gland, it was flashing light into my eyes, right? So I was like, whoa, I was like, I got it. I get that now. And then we have the structure, which is the geometry that flows. So we are this macrocosm in a microcosm, right? Or we're a microcosm in a macrocosm. Like, it's actually upside down, inside out, and back to front. So it doesn't matter where you look, you're going to see yourself. And it doesn't matter where you are, you're with yourself. And it doesn't matter who you're with yourself. And we're all just in these, we're all one bit, but we're all contained in these geometries that make it look like we're not one. We're together, two ones of the bigger one. So there's this perfect nesting that goes on throughout creation. And so if we are looking out of these two eyes at what's around us, we're seeing ourselves reflected back at ourselves. And that's really quite an extraordinary concept, because when we start to see wars and genocide and pestilence and genetic manipulation and genetic engineering and GMO foods and, you know, all of big pharma, all of the stuff that's, you know, for those who are waking up, we're thinking there's this tendency to want to fight against or to rally against. And I'd like to just bring that back to reminding everyone that, you know, the way that energy works is that if you push against something, you know, physics says it's going to come pushing back at you too. It's actually going to make it bigger. So the totally taking the focus off and taking 100% responsibility for the incarnations that we've had before and before and before that have led us to this place, and learning to love ourselves, even though we've made mistakes and we haven't been awake as much as we are now. And now in that space, we can then approach all consciousness, all aspects of unity, all aspects of self in a way that is loving, but we also don't need to tolerate being abused or walked over or any of those things. If we can become self-loving and harmless to ourselves, and then bring that out into how we evolve and what we leave behind for the children, for one another, and to come back to, that's the way forward as far as I can see it.
You make a couple of interesting points. I had a big discussion in class last night, and the difference between empowering somebody and helping somebody to energize themselves, because we were it was very, very in-depth discussion about how to empower somebody, but how they can empower themselves using the mind, but they forget to use their energy. And that's, you know, where you're coming from, I think, Freya, is if we teach people to energize themselves, then they stand in their own power, but then they can use their mind with that power to actually empower themselves. And so we were talking about people that were living with narcissists, that had been living with narcissists for years and trying to work out how to break that cycle, because the average person can't just walk in and say, just leave them because they're nasty. Well, that doesn't work. But a lot of people, you can empower them by making them feel good, but you're actually better off teaching them how to use their energy, increase their energy, which empowers them as well. So it's talking, you know, the breath work that was just being discussed. It's the same thing. You're bringing energy up through the body, loving me, myself, and I, my best three mates, and then understanding that from that space you can actually empower people. So it doesn't matter whether, you know, because there was a lot of talk, people get mixed up between talking about this stuff and going, oh, well, all narcissists are men, all the people that have been raped are just women, when it's actually, there's stuff goes on the flip side of all of that as well. And so they make it gender-based, and they forget it's not about gender, it's about power and energy to empower ourselves through breath, utilizing sound, which is one of my real specialty fields, and then bringing it all together to empower ourselves on an energetic level from the ground up, from the universe down, but it emanates out. And that's what I think you're getting at, Freya, is that empowerment, but empowerment from energy as well as mind.
Integration, I think what you're touching on as well, Anthony, like definitely in therapy, people can talk about something for so long. And with a client who I did breathwork with yesterday, she had been in therapy for years and had done counseling in a whole range of different techniques. And we were talking about setting the intention before her breathwork is setting the GPS coordinates for where she was going to be going, but then also remaining open to surrendering to whatever it is that's going to be greater than what she can imagine. And so no matter how much she had a mental understanding of what the issues were, the dots were only put together and the bigger picture revealed to her so beautifully and organically towards the end of her breathwork session, where she was like, oh my God, because the lady in question, she had actually because of certain emotional things going on, without going into all the details, she'd actually controlled her body and her body's response to things to the point where she wouldn't sweat. And she was having a lot of difficulty where there was like prickling sensations in her skin because the sweat was busting to get out. But because of the emotional experiences she had, which are trapped in her body and not expressed and not released and integrated, it was stopping her body from sweating a little bit. So she was like fully like a fire hose, going for it, like breathing, like getting hot and like on fire. And then once that was all released, she came back to being cool and she was fine. She's like, oh my God, I'm sweating again. Like, what magic is that to be able to facilitate and hold, a human being's journey in that way? It gives me chills. It's like
and it still comes back to this empowering, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You're not telling them how to do something. You're not saying, this is a counsellor. See, one of the reasons I'll never become a counsellor is because I can't tell people what I think. And think is not even the right word, because quite often I channel information through. So again, what comes out of my mouth, I stand by it. But the understanding is we are about not telling people they have to do stuff a certain way. What we're saying to them is, let's expand your energy and your mind and let it flow. And that's perfect. And yeah, and I should also just add, Freya, I'm one of those weird people that when I play the flute, I actually see colour going into people.
It's
and there is a specific name for it, and I can never remember it because obviously it's not important. But when I play my Native American flute, I actually see the colour. So I have my eyes closed and I'll see the colour flowing. So that's how sound, vibration, colour, frequency all work together, in my world anyway.
Yeah, it's also interesting. I think that I feel like Lou might have something to add to this, because I feel like the connection with the earth, feet on the earth, and also the movement of the body, and also that really reconnecting to the way that we were in that. If we all take a look around us right now, what about what you are sitting in is in any way natural? I mean, we've got a light tree inside the house, just so we can feel like we're a bit more in nature, but it's all fake.
I can look out my blind and I've got trees just there.
Yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah, absolutely, Freya. I've spent many years walking in nature and spending time in various different environments, out in mountainsides, along rivers. And what I've come to know in spending that time and really being present to the earth is that most definitely there's energy all around, but in some places, even pockets of energy that are really potently attuned to energize us. So and very often we forget that we are a part of the earth, and the earth itself is our life source. How often do we tune into the nature that is freely available to us, that is healing us in so many different ways and on so many different levels? I mean, even if you go out and you listen to the sound of a bubbling brook, or the birds, or the wind, all of that is frequency. The color that you see, all of that is frequency. And so when you go and you spend that time just being present with nature and the earth, and maybe lie down and sit under a tree. You know, all of that is having an incredible impact on our emotional bodies, our physical health, and our spiritual well-being.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so I would recommend to anyone to spend as much time as they can in nature. Also because we are energy, and we talk so much about healing the earth, you know, but the best way that we can give of ourselves is to actually go there. If we're wanting to save a natural environment, the best thing we can do is actually go and spend time there and be in reverence and teach our children about what the natural environment feels like and how important it is and how beautiful it is and how sustaining it is for our lives. So going and spending time is probably the best thing that we can do energetically.
Absolutely.
Ecotourism, maybe.
Yeah.
You spoke about something that really sparked me a couple of times ago with our podcast. I think it was wildness and well-being or something, was it?
So wilderness equals well-being.
Yes. Is there anything more you can add to that? I know you have a lot of wisdom in this regard, and I find it so beautiful and fascinating. Is there anything else that you find is really important that maybe the majority of us don't know, or that is really keen to reconnection with us? Because some people are so removed from it, they don't even know how to interact with it. They're so scared of it. Even, you know, children, the fear and anxiety in children that I see around me is just unbelievable. And I know their little circuits are getting fried from so many different avenues, but even like talking to someone, I can't remember who it was, whether it's someone that's living in Bali, another person, so many different people I've been privileged to meet lately, but they were just saying when they disconnected from the electricity and everything like that, and really the peace that came over them and the change in their physiology at so many levels, just so different. So I just wondered, I know you've had your own experiences, maybe it was even yourself. I know we were speaking a little bit too after the podcast, but yeah, just thought anything that landed or anything that sparked when I was talking then that you might be able to share with us.
A lot of what I spend my time doing when I'm out in nature is walking. And I had a really interesting experience about 9 years ago when I volunteered to cover a story on a heritage walk for the local lifestyle magazine that I was a photo journalist for. And I had no idea that the walk was 140 kilometers over mountainous in the wilderness in Africa. And that equates to 30 kilometers a day. So off I went with my camera bag and was just thrown in walking through the wilderness for 4 solid days, from sunrise to sunset and beyond. And
amazing.
I nearly died, I'm telling you, the second day.
Thank God.
But what I recognized was that as I was walking, the first couple of days, my whole body went into conflict, and so much stuff was coming up, you know, in my mind, in my body. And then as I kept walking and walking through it, I started releasing, you know, my mind started quieting and my feelings settled and my body started finding a flow. And as I was walking, I started acquiring my own and learning about my own rhythm. And so about 2 months after that walk, I had a spontaneous realization or a download on how walking is an art of healing, and how walking is what makes us human and what connects us to the earth. And ever since that day, I've been exploring that notion and talking to people about it. It's not a very common thing, you know, nobody really thinks about walking. We learn how to walk and then we get on with it, but we don't really recognize how important conscious walking can be in a process of coming to know ourselves. And particularly if we're walking in nature, we have that ability to connect not only with ourselves, but with the world around us as well. And so we learn about the interplay of our energies, and we can really, I mean, there's so much to be discovered about that. I think it's a pretty, and I don't know if it's a very common topic at all, but certainly we are all able to explore that. It's something we have.
Yeah, there's I think there's an interesting one there, Louise. What you're saying, I totally get. I spent enough time walking around the bush and living out in the bush that I'm just totally comfortable there. But one of the interesting ones is the El Camino Santiago walk, which goes across Europe into Spain and follows or retraces the footsteps of the Crusades. And I'm not sure if you noticed in the last issue of the mag, Blaze, who is part of Busybird, who's looks after the mag with me, she wrote her story and she broke it down into weeks. You know, this is the first thing that happens, then the second thing, then there's this boring bit that everyone skips because they have to confront the boringness of that walk, that particular, 3-4 days of that walk. You know, we're talking, 160, 180 plus Ks for these walks. And so they have these pilgrimages that people are doing to get out and about. And the ones that go and skip the boring bits never come to terms with what's going on up here in their minds because they don't want to have to confront it fully. So you have your physical, your mental, your spiritual experience. Throw the wilderness in, and that adds a whole nother definition of being who you are. And it's really amazing. I mean, I spent 13 days on horseback riding through the Simpson Desert, and predominantly with a small group, by myself though, because my horse and I didn't tolerate humans very well. And so we spent a lot of time walking by ourselves and, noticing things like the dingo walking behind me and the birds and the this and the that. A lot of time to think. And I think that's what walking gives you, that sort of experience, that time to lose the ego and understand, well, you're there and you have to confront your thought processes. And if you can't confront them, you're in all sorts of dramas, because then you're going to end up in a world of pain. But if you can confront them and understand them in some way, shape or form, guess what? You've done exactly what you've just said to people you can do. You can grow, you can expand, you can connect, you can be in a place where you're just there, and that's really important.
There was a particular place that Louise and I went together some time back near the area of Wilpena Pound in South Australia in the Flinders Ranges.
Beautiful spot.
It is extraordinary, and I mean, I've lived pretty much I've lived in the Daintree, I've lived in the desert, in the Pilbara, I've lived on the coasts and explored most of Australia, and there is something different that happens to your being in every different environment.
Mm-hmm.
When I wanted to go within and work out some things that were going on inside myself, I went to the forest, because in the Daintree you're enveloped, and also there's a decaying process going on constantly. And so I was particularly seeking some quietness there. And in the desert, it's different. It's like often red with blue and not much going. So you get this clarity that happens in the mind. But this place was very interesting because I was called to go there and did not even know who the Indigenous country or tribe was. But when I got there, I sought them out. And I knew that I was going there to get to a particular place, but I didn't know what it was called. And I certainly couldn't find it on a map. And working with the country and the people who know that country the best, the people who've lived there for tens of thousands of generations, they are so one with that country. They literally test you, especially a white woman rocking up and going, there's a site I need to get to, you know, and they're like, oh, you know, where do you want to go? And I'm like, I'm not sure. And the answer is always, oh, you white fellas, you never know where you're going, do you? And I'm like, back off, give me a second, I'll work it out, just tuning in. So, but I finally worked it out. And when I went, in order for me to go to this place, because it's not on the map, it's so sacred, it's carbon dated at 140,000 years old, far older than 70,000 years, people. And so I had to go through a stage of initiations in order to even be able to get there. I was sent to spend a night at a particular site, and at that site there was an earth guardian who was not in his body, who was a what you'd call a featherfoot or a Kuditcha man in the Western Australian terms. And I had to engage him and go beyond what it is that that the normal person would, in order to even be able to make it to the next stage of things. Then I went up to the community and I sat with the elders for 3 days. We didn't talk about much most of the time. They asked me what I was doing there, and I gave them an interesting explanation, and they sat with that, and then they took me out, walked me around and showed me bush foods. We walked, you know, we walked. And then he said, well, you know, my leg's not good. I'm not going to take you to this place, but you can go there. You'll need to walk. And so in the middle of November, I took off with about a litre of water and an apple for many kilometres into the Flinders Ranges. And I was with one other person. But what occurred when I walked out on that country was I knew who I was. I knew where and why I was going. And I was so attuned to the environment around me, I could literally hear the thoughts that the person with me was thinking. And I could sense in the land when the moment was to stop. And at that point, because of the way I be, I invoke and honour the directions and the elements and the ancestors and all of those things. The Adnyamatna people, their spirit animal is the eagle. And so from the moment that invocation finished and taking one step forward, 2 huge eagles flew out of the sacred site. And that sacred site was, you know, I was literally given a squiggle mark on a bit of paper and told, well, you might see a tree that looks like this kind of a patch of dirt like this. And, you know, if you get there, then you can go and you can take other people there too. So what the ancient original cultures know is that we belong to the earth, and you've got to be listening to yourself and to creation and nature all of the time to be able to flow. And the moment you start interfering with that, with televisions, computers, namaste, Russell, radios, and all of the other things that we have, all the frequencies that get pumped out, that's what discombobulates us, disconnects us, causes anxiety, stress, and where we are being distracted from the truth of who we really are. I 100% agree with Lou, you know, that wilderness is wellness.
Except the conundrum here, the elephant in the room, is the fact that everything we're doing right now is over computers. Everything we're asking people to listen to us to is over frequency. There are good frequencies and there are bad frequencies, and I think trying to balance those is the tricky bit.
It's moderation. I agree. We're in the world. We're not of the world. It's simply about having healthy practices, isn't it? tune in to what's going to be really good for you. Feed your mind, your ears, your consciousness, your body with those things. And when you're not using them, switch them off. Put them away.
Go outside.
Go outside.
Well, you know, if you come and live here, you can spend all your days outside because that's what we do most of our free time.
And women.
Like 30 seconds, so it seems like we're at a good space.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a beautiful share.
Thank you so much. It was amazing.
Appreciate all the
like,
shares and the wisdom.
enjoyed it.
And thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Janna, for being on with us as well. We really
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, our
Pleasure.
honour. So, yeah. But anything lastly to add? Anyone have anything to say before we cut off?
I think we should all go for a walk.
I can tell you when I walk from here, I'll be walking about, 50 steps through a little bit of driveway with lots of trees. The sun's going down slowly. I'm very blessed to live where I live on the acreage that I do, and the animals and the birds and everything that comes around is from the snakes to the spiders to the whole lot, the whole gambit, the deer, everything that wanders through our place. So nature is definitely a way and a space to be.
Whereabouts are you, Anthony?
I'm on the outskirts, about 23k as the crow flies from Melbourne, in the northeastern suburbs, so out past Eltham.
Beautiful.
So it's a little slice of heaven that's close to the Yarra River, and it's about 3 k's away. And it's just, we're just getting our little bush block sort of livable and de-weeded and, acceptable to have people come visit.
Yay.
Yay.
Home grounds. That's what I was wanting.
Yeah.
So that's all good.
All right.
Awesome.
Take care. Love and light to you all. And I hope to cross paths with all of us really soon. And to all our listeners today, what a wonderful gift that our guests provided for us today in the discussions. And thank you all for your contribution.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Ta-ta.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.